Hey everybody, I'm Brock Shinen, and this is not a fancy speech. This is not a TED Talk. This is not a sell. I'm not selling anything. I'm not trying to get your business. I'm a lawyer. I'm a strategy consultant. This for churches and ministries all over the country and different parts of the world. This is actually a call to arms. This is just me looking at the playing field right now and what's happening in churches and in ministries, and me reaching out and saying we need to do something. Now, I know many churches feel like, well, hey, Brock, we're on top of it. We got ministries for that. We got people activated for that. I want to talk briefly about an angle of the fight that I'm not convinced churches in America are really looking at, but I also want to talk about some practical on the ground strategies that I think can significantly improve the situation for churches. And also, I want to call out pastors and leadership in churches. And I realize, look, who am I? Who's this guy Brock telling us what to do? You can take this with a grain of salt. The churches that work with me, the ministries that work with me, trust me. And if you know who they are, you know who I am, you know that what I'm saying, I don't take this lightly. I don't put together videos on this. As a lawyer and a strategy consultant, politics is not an area of my expertise. It's not something you'd normally find me in a conversation on. So the fact that I'm putting together a video like this, even for me, I take very seriously. So I do want to talk about the overlap of law and politics and how it's affecting the church right now, and give you some practical strategies. So I'm gonna come at this from a few different angles and explain to you why I'm doing this video and who it's for and how it's going to help you. Because again, I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm not offering a service. I see ministry and I see churches attacked and attacked and attacked. And I really believe that the church is in some ways turning a completely blind eye to it in favor of, if God's for us, who can be against us? Which, look, I'm not a theologian. I'm not arguing with that stance. I also believe that we're to be as wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Again, not a theologian. So I'm coming at this like, look, I see some stuff going on in the church and in this country that I want to speak into. I'm not trying to polarize people. I'm not trying to polarize leadership. I'm just pointing out that there is this particular angle on the attack, and that I think the church has some tools that it is not using. And part of this is going to feel like a call out to pastors and leaders. And I'm okay with that. Get angry if you want. Be angry with me if you want. That's fine. Because if this helps one church, it's worth it for me. So jumping right in. We've seen during COVID, we've seen during the last, basically the beginning of 2020 and to this day, that the church has been under the strain of, get out of the building. You can't come back into the building. And then when you can, it's limited capacity. If you're going to come back, everybody has to wear masks. And so there's all this political control that has been put onto churches. Now, I know some pastors are saying, hey, we're okay with that because you got to obey the laws of the land. Those are the laws. That's great. I'm not talking to you in the sense of challenging the laws. So I want to, at each step of the way, I want to clarify what my message is. I'm not saying, hey, go out there and protest. I'm not saying, go, show up at your governor's house and start screaming and all that kind of stuff. That's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about here is first giving perspective of what's been happening. And little by little, through 2020 and into 2021, we've seen the church's rights with religious freedom being taken away. Now, we can say, well, how's that true, Brock? We're still able to preach the gospel. We just shifted online. I mean, first, I want to point out the fact that the vast majority of churches in America don't have the economic or the technological ability to just, quote, shift online. That's reserved for churches that have money, have resources, have even the following and where they're able to reach. And it's been a great opportunity for them. But by and large, most churches can't just shift and haven't just shifted online. So it's actually put churches, a huge number of churches, on the ropes to go under, which I think big churches have a responsibility to kind of look at that and say, look, if there's whatever 350,000 churches on record in America, and only 10,000 of them or 100,000 of them were able to kind of transition to this online experience, streaming services, blah blah blah, and also exploit that. I think all of us as the Big C Church have to look at, well, what about those other 200,000, 300,000 churches that were not able to make that transition? Where are they? I mean, let's think about what's going on in our community of churches, that there were a lot that were put on the ropes, and some of them knocked out for the count because they lack the financial resources, they lack the technological resources, they lack the personnel to switch it. And I know there's plenty of people watching, well, they could have just went on YouTube or Facebook Live or whatever. That's easy for us to say who do that and know how to do that. But there are a lot of churches in America that don't even know how to do something that simple. And they're still on, the physical overhead transparency. And, we're talking about digital this and digital that. And there's a lot of churches that haven't even been able to get up to speed on just showing lyrics on the wall with a computer. But I do think we have to take a moment and say, look, we really need to come to grips with the church has been punched in the gut in the last year and a half, a little less than a year and a half, specifically with respect to COVID and church rights. But there's this whole other front of, can you hire, can you employ, or can you fire, can you refuse to employ somebody that identifies differently in gender? Can you take action against people who are within a protected class outside of religion, but now we say, well, as a religious institution, I can't discriminate. I can't make these decisions because there's this complex web of federal law, state law, municipality or city government, and controls, and how that all influences us. And I'll tell you, as a little side note to this, there are attorneys and groups of attorneys that all they do is fight for religious freedoms. And I will tell you, even those people are seeing it's pretty grim right now. Historically, we've looked at the church in America and say, man, we're pretty good. We're pretty safe. We have separation of church and state, and, we have religious freedoms. We can say what we want. But I mean, any of you who are listening to this or watching this video and can look back at the last, 12 to 16 months and say, that's true for every church in America, you're turning a blind eye to reality. The reality is pastors are getting beat up by politics and law. The church is getting beat up by politics and law. I mean, how many of you are saying we have zero restrictions and zero fear and zero, tension in our church right now, that despite COVID? And I would say that's very, very few. I could think of, I'm in California licensed attorney, but also just California, Christian living in California. And there's a couple of churches, there's one, and you could do the research on this. Neither of these are my clients. This is all public information, but a big church up in Santa Clara, where it's like, hey, we're a church, we can do what we want. We're getting back in the building. We're not going to wear masks. I don't know all the details, but the point is hefty fines, penalties, a lot of tension, a lot of fear within the city, within the building, total set of new problems. And meanwhile, over in, I think it's Chino Hills, you have a pastor who's people back in the building, no masks, no social distancing and all that kind of stuff. And it's a completely different political environment. And I think many of the people in the state of California, many of the people that are across the United States are looking at those situations and saying, well, it's this, it's that. And by and large, every argument, every reference that I've heard has been pretty much off base in terms of why. Is it God? Is it a miracle that one church in Chino Hills is able to operate, it seems relatively unscathed, and here's another one that can't, and it's been hit with fines and penalties and all these kinds of, locks on the doors and all that. Is it spiritual warfare? Sure. Is it, is it city, there's a lot of explanations. But what I want to point out is that the church is not stepping back and taking stock of, if we don't do something, religious freedoms in this country for churches, for religious institutions, will be gone. They'll be eliminated. And anybody that knows me knows that I'm not a conspiracy theorist, knows that I'm not, I'm not that person, and I don't have these kinds of conversations. So I'm looking at this more pragmatically and saying, look, if we don't start paying attention and doing something, our religious freedoms are going to be gone in this country. And it's little steps. I think that the administrations and the parties and the political groups that want to ultimately kill religious institutions and religious freedoms, I think they've learned in part that you can't necessarily come straight on. You can't necessarily do the obvious. So what they've learned is to do the less obvious, to come at the side, to chip away. And there are attorneys and there are politicians and there are people that are invested in destroying the church in America. And the church, hey, they're saying, well, what about the church in, underground churches in China and other parts of the world where they're persecuted? We just got to get used to it. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I do think the American church has to get used to persecution. But I'm also saying we live in a democracy, and yet our democracy is enabling our rights to be stripped. That's not the same analysis in China that's under communism, where you can explain away why the church is persecuted and how rights are stripped. Yeah, the government works towards that end. In a democracy, that should never happen, and yet it is happening. And I have churches every day calling me, Brock, what do we do about this situation? Are we allowed to do this thing? Are we allowed to violate our religious beliefs because we're worried about a lawsuit? We're worried about the public opinion. So I want to throw a few things at you to consider. One is, legally, I think any lawyer that's in this space and any politician in this space that can kind of speak into it would say, there's no 100% safe certainty of a course of action that a church in America can take right now that will be free from the attack of the legal system, the political system, or the public system. It's in my mind, it's an impossibility. And I think if you speak to any lawyer that knows what they're talking about right now in this country, in this climate, would say, yeah, actually, there is no way to do it, quote, legally. And, whether it's holding meetings, whether it's not, refusing to hire a certain person of a certain identity or whatever that issue is. I think if you speak to any lawyer that has their head in the game, they're going to say, actually, there is no safe way to do it. Because even if the law's on your side, you can get sued. And if you get sued, you have to get to trial to win the case. If you don't get to trial, you cannot win. So what happens a lot of times strategically is the different parties or whoever is going after a church to drain them of resources, not to win the case, to drain them of resources, to pressure them, to put them under financially. And that's how they make momentum. And then there's a settlement. Or then they take a church that cannot defend itself. It doesn't have the resources to defend itself. And they pick the perfect issues to generate case law. And then they win that case and they apply that law in a much more difficult setting where they wouldn't have been able to win at a certain church in a certain geographic region under a different set of facts. But you can apply law from here over there. And it becomes much, much more difficult to stop that moving train. So what do we do? As a church, this is a call out, and it's a call out somewhat spiritually, but also pragmatically. Again, you can listen to this, and maybe, for some of you who are like, why am I still listening to this guy? Look, you can ignore what I'm saying, but I'm telling you as a lawyer who loves the church, been a Christian my whole life, parents in ministry, grandparents in ministry. The church I love the church. It's Jesus's bride, like it's God's bride. I look at the church and I say, I want to protect you. I'm not selling anything to you. I just want to protect you. So you can ignore my advice, and that's my point. But I think it would be wise to at least consider it. Just consider it. So here's some things to think about. In church, we know how to, quote, disciple people. We know how to get them into our systems. They take 101 and then they move to 102. And if they're really committed to, wanting to be leadership, we move them into 200 and 201 and 202, whatever you call it in your church. You get my point, if I'm using the wrong names. But we're really good in the church of setting up hierarchy and setting up systems and structures. But those systems and structures work well when we can control from the top down. They do not work well, generally speaking, when we have to send out without control measures, without, quote, accountability. So we typically don't send out church planters without them being responsible to us or answering to us, being accountable to us. We typically don't send out missionaries without them, being accountable to us. And if we send them out and say we're not accountable, you're not accountable to us, we tend to not want to fund them, because there's a lot of different reasons, but we don't want to be responsible if they go off the rails, right? And now they're supposed to be falling under our leadership, but how can we control them if they're in another country, or if they're out in the business world, or they're in the political realm? The reason why I'm bringing this up is because in the last 5 years in my life, I've heard more and more conversation about we need to activate people in the 7 mountains or the 7 spheres, whatever. I'm sure you've heard the term. In arts and entertainment, in medicine and education and politics, all those kinds of, spheres of influence in this country and in the world. And we say the church needs to activate there. But what we do is we form little groups and we have, people, let's try and get the actors who are famous, that are Christian or Christian friendly. Let's try and go after these high level educators or, politicians, or let's try and get somebody to be president. But I'm going to give you something that's much more practical. And this came out of a conversation with a lawyer who does, for his entire career, is fighting for religious freedoms. And we had a conversation the other day. And this was his advice. This is me sort of translating and passing along his advice. And he said, Brock, what we need is people who are going to city council meetings and listening. And when there's a conversation that affects the church, it may be zoning related, it may be nuisance related, it may be mask wearing related, it may be even just like if somebody can have a Bible and a megaphone on the street corner, if that's coming up at the city council meeting and we the church don't have people in that council meeting, what do you think is going to happen? So the church focuses on the big impact. We need people in the seat of governor. We need mayors. We need presidents. And I don't disagree. But where the church is hugely missing the point and missing the boat to actually make large scale change is in the city council meeting, the town hall meetings, the school board meetings. We're not sending people and activating people into those environments and empowering them to protect on behalf of the church. Because in the church, and this is my call out to pastors, and this is my call out to leadership, and you may not like to hear this, and that's okay. I'm okay if you're mad at me. I'll do this despite that anger, because I think it's worth it. I think it's worth you getting mad that you don't like being called out by some guy you don't even know, right? I'm okay with that. So we're used to in the church saying we're not going to send somebody in that environment unless they answer to us, unless we control the messaging, unless we make sure they're indoctrinated properly and they're representing this church properly. But here's the thing. How many people want to go to a school board meeting or a town hall meeting based on activation, empowerment by the church, versus I have a vested interest in what's happening in my city or what's happening in my school? I might show up to a school board meeting if I find out my kid's school is teaching this aspect of curriculum or this topic in the curriculum in 3rd grade. I'm not okay with that. I'm going to show up as a parent. The church isn't empowering that. The church is empowering. We need to take control, and we need to, put people in places of leadership. And what I'm saying is, I'm not necessarily against that or saying that's wrong. What I'm saying is we're missing the other half of the equation. The church needs people that are just showing up, that are listening, that are participating in these conversations, that are arguing and fighting for the church. And I'll tell you this, it may get messy. It may not be what we hope would be representative of our particular church in our particular city. But if you're willing to risk it, if you're willing to risk the conversation where you have concerned people that are members of the community, members of the church showing up to these meetings, you're going to have a lot more influence. And that was evidenced in this Chino Hills church situation, where you wonder why this church gets away with, having services during COVID and, no mask and no social distancing. And they're like, what the heck? Like, how did that happen? Well, part of it is because there's this whole media element of, oh, Trump controls America. Now Biden controls America. I mean, if you know anything about the Constitution, about law and politics, you understand neither president controls America. I mean, it's a complex web of laws. It's a complex web of hierarchy and authority where, think about it, just to sort of simplify the analogy, the difference between a police officer's jurisdiction, a sheriff's jurisdiction, and a highway patrol jurisdiction. You realize, oh, wait, and I'm sure most of you have asked, can a policeman give a speeding ticket on the freeway? Can a highway patrolman give a speeding ticket on a street that's not a highway? When you ask those questions, that's actually critical thinking. And that's what we lack when we think about the law and the legal and political environment over the last year and a half of who actually controls these decisions. And ironically, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because a lot of reasons why we see things happening in churches where they seem to, quote, get away with things is because they actually are active in the very local sort of grassroots. They're showing up to school board meetings. They're showing up to town hall meetings and city hall meetings. They're fostering relationship with the city council and the mayor, maybe doing prayer breakfasts, whatever. But it's not about showboating Christianity and politics. And it's certainly not about placing people in high level politics. It's actually the grassroots movements to influence politics because the church is showing up to these things. And I will tell you, if you go anywhere in America right now, there's a good chance that any meeting that you're seeing, school board, city council, town hall, whatever it is, you're probably not seeing Christians show up as sort of representing the church. You may see Christians showing up to represent their kid in school and what they're being taught in school. You may see a person that's showing up to a city council meeting because their home is going to be affected by development across the street, and they're Christian, so there's that sort of Christian component. But by and large, we're not seeing the church activate people into these meetings where the sole agenda is just to be representative of the church, to watch out for the church's interest. Because number one, churches don't understand that. They don't understand that influence. They're thinking power is how you influence. But actually, a lot of times, you can have one mayor. There's one mayor in a city, but you can have 30 people that show up to a city council meeting that are representing the church. And they're arguing with 5 people who represent the city, or 500. The numbers don't matter. The point is, there's actual influence happening. And we as a church are not allowing for that. Part of it is because of the hierarchy in churches where leaders are mentored and developed by other leaders, and then they're subject to the accountability and responsibility. There's like this hierarchical leadership relationship where we don't set people free. I was with a group of guys recently, and I was listening to a pastor who's planting churches in his city. And he was talking about, man, I just want to let some of these people loose, but I'm so afraid, they're going to do the wrong thing and, whatever, make us look bad, reflect poorly on the home church, that sort of thing. And, one of the things I said is, I said, have you ever read the book, The Starfish and the Spider? And if that rings a bell for some of you, the concept is with a spider, if you cut off a leg, it's not going to grow back. You cut off something, it's probably going to die. A starfish, on the other hand, will grow a new one. It will regenerate. And so the idea being that you could sort of diffuse power and it actually expands, and you could cut off and separate. And actually, sometimes there have been circumstances where a starfish leg was cut off and the leg part grows a new starfish. As crazy as that sounds. But when you think about churches, we just don't operate that way. If we can't make somebody accountable, if we can't oversee their activities, that's why we need people, doing, Bible studies and worship services in the office building. We got to make sure they're showing Christ. When in reality, what would be better to equip people going into business? And this is part of the conversations I'm hearing in the church. We need to activate entrepreneurs. We need to activate people in the business space. That's the next move of God, is, people in the business sphere. And again, I don't necessarily disagree with that. But how we are doing it as a church is disempowering. It's saying the only way you can do it is if you do it according to our set of rules in our books. And look, I'm not trying to make a theological argument about, chaos versus order, or structure and responsibility and accountability. That's for your in-house theologians and leadership to argue about. What I'm saying is a direct human common sense observation that churches are not empowering their communities to go out into the communities without a hierarchical structure. So we miss the boat to influence politics. We miss the boat to influence education. We miss the boat to influence, when there's meetings at the local hospital about, just community care and how the hospital is serving. What churches are quote, activating people to go in there and say, just represent the church. If something comes up that, as a resource, like if the hospital is dealing with a homelessness community, what if there was somebody from the church that says, hey, you know what? The hospital can't serve this community or can't fully serve them, but the church can. So what I'm saying is there's a huge void in how the church is resourcing and activating people into local, municipal type of, municipal may not be the best word, but I mean that sort of local grassroots level of influence where it's happening in school boards, town hall, city hall, community events, community center events, even 4th of July picnics, that are ran by the city. There's so much opportunity. And the reason why this is so critical to you as a church right now is because if you're saying our church has been shut down under lock and key, they literally, are throwing people in jail. And I know that's happening in other countries, first world countries. I know that's happening. They're literally pulling people off the streets for walking without a mask or even being on the streets without them being what do you call it? The word I'm talking about, but they're essential. They're fining them. They're throwing them in jail. And I'm not talking about Canada. I'm talking about America. In America, if that's happening, I'm not trying to activate the militia and start a constitutional civil war. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm not talking about starting war. I'm talking about the church missing significant opportunity to influence the very decisions that the church is now saying, how did we get here? How did we get a lock on our door? How are we still at 25% capacity? How is it that in California on June 15th, everything's going to miraculously change? I will tell you, the world doesn't care about the church's orders and hierarchies and structures. The world indoctrinates and sends out, indoctrinates and sends out. The church indoctrinates, controls, sends out under control. And it's a complete different paradigm. And I'm not saying to mimic the world. I'm not at all advocating that we, institute chaos in order to put Christians in unique places of influence. What I'm saying is there is a strategy for influencing the situation that your church finds itself in. And that starts with the very local, not we need a mayor, we need a governor, we need city council members even. I'm not talking about that. We need people showing up to the meetings, because if we don't, the agenda of the world, the agenda of darkness is going to continue to creep forward, continue to gain more ground because the Christians aren't showing up until mayor. Well, now we got a Christian mayor. Guess what? A Christian mayor has a term of influence. A Christian governor has a term of influence. A Christian president has a term of influence. And then poof, it's gone. If you're showing up to these meetings, your church's influence is perpetual. It's always there. It's at every moment, or it can be, and it should be. And if we don't, we're going to find that, hey, the church just got sued because it refused to let a man use the woman's bathroom. How did we get here? I'm telling you how we got here. It's little by little. How can we have a statement of faith and then get sued and lose if we violate our, if we don't violate our statement of faith? Step by step. It happens all over the world throughout history. But in this current climate in America, that is how it's happening. And one of the best things, most effective things you can do as a church to meet this issue right now, head on and fight it, is to get your people out into the community, into these meetings without the restrictions of, you answered us, you better, this is your script, this is the church's position, you better take it and adopt it. It can get messy, but I'm telling you, there are churches that I work with that allow for maybe what I might call controlled messes. They're not just letting people come through and destroy the church, but they are saying it may get messy. And what we're going to do is make sure we provide a sort of workable safe haven around that mess. I don't know the best analogy for it, but there's a difference between absolute chaos and messiness that can be cleaned up and worked through. And as you're putting these people into these meetings, maybe you're giving them resources. Maybe you're helping them bridge with people who do have experience. I have a good friend who she's experienced in politics and social media, and she's advocating for people to get involved in politics. And you start to meet people like that, and you're like, there's others out there like me, and maybe you feel God activate you for politics or education or medical care or whatever, and you start to realize the more you're involved, the more influence you can have. But the church is one unit of development, discipleship, and sending out. And it, generally speaking, historically has not done a great job of activating people into uncontrolled environments where those people have to think on their feet without accountability, without discipline, because we're afraid. What happens if they get it wrong? What happens if they say the wrong thing, if they screw up and it reflects badly on us? Well, I'm telling you, we're in an era, I believe, where the church is going to have to get a little bit more comfortable with, it might get messy. It might get ugly. It might reflect poorly on you. But if you don't want to find yourself as a church a year from now, 4 years from now, 10 years from now, saying we have to, by law, do everything that the world does, we're going to have to start doing underground churches. We're going to have to basically shut our doors and start doing home churches, which I will tell you right now, there is a huge movement towards home churches that are like, quote, off the grid, outside the purview of the law. And I'm not saying that's smart. I'm not saying that's stupid. What I am saying is there's already a movement towards that, because I do think a certain segment of the church sees the writing on the wall. We're not communist. This is a democracy, as I've said, but at some point the laws and the structures will overwhelm, or can, and this is not a prophetic statement, just sort of statistical observation, that the law and politics can start to weigh so heavily on the church. And it reminds me of an argument about guns, and I don't want to go off tangent, but you can fight guns head on. We're taking your guns, we're taking your guns. But at some level, there's always going to be a battle back, right? But okay, we're not going to take your guns. We'll just make it impossible for you to have ammunition. Now, again, this is critical thinking. I'm not advocating anything. I'm not taking a political stance. I'm just saying we've lost our ability to critically think. If you want to take on a gun battle, you don't take the guns. You make it impossible to get ammo, and the guns are ineffective, right? So I'm saying this is what the world is doing to the church. And I'm going to give you another a true story. I was talking to somebody who is high up in leadership within unions. And this person was telling me that unions are looking at the church and the church's ability to gather community around an idea and foster community around that idea and propel people to get behind that idea. Union leadership has looked at the church and said, the church is awesome at this. We're going to start doing this. So I don't know if you know this, and I would guess that most people in America don't even realize this or know this, is that unions are starting to have what looks like a church service. They have some entertainment that's like our worship. They'll have some announcements that's like our announcements. And they'll have some teaching that's like our teaching, preaching, whatever. But it's their indoctrination. So the experience is like, man, I don't even need to go to church. If I'm a part of a union, I get to go to this thing, and some of them are setting them up in community locations to foster the idea behind unions are good for these reasons. And you can have a community experience around it, even if you're not even in the union, even if you're not on a job or work for an employer where the union even has anything to do with it. You could come to our community experience, but it's indoctrination. And guess what? They're learning from the church. And they're saying church does one thing well, gathers people in a room, makes them put smiles on their face and sing and dance and learn and listen. And we got all the bells and whistles. We got the great coffee, and we got the good donuts. We got the jumpy house for the kids, and movie. We got once a year we got at the movies, and they serve us popcorn. All the things that churches are doing, the world is saying that's pretty brilliant to get people in a room around an idea. Guess what? We're going to do that too, but it's going to be around gay pride, or it's going to be around indoctrinating kids in the educational system, and that is working for them. So I'm going to sign off with this, guys. Look, if you don't want to see religious freedoms completely stripped, if you don't want to see the church's rights completely stripped in our lifetime, and I don't mean our distant lifetime, I mean literally during the next couple of years, if you don't want to see that happen, you need to be activating people into the community where they know it might get messy, it might get ugly. They don't have a script for it. And encouraging them to show up to these meetings, to speak on behalf of the larger church, not just your church, the larger church. I'm also recommending that you reach out. There's, like I said, I think CCLI or Barna, whoever, there's like 360,000 churches in America, and those are the known, quote, registered ones. I'm encouraging, if you're a church that kind of has things together right now, reach out to 10 or 50 or 1,000 churches if you can, that are in your city, your state, your whatever, your location, your reach, that you can encourage and support and resource. Because those churches that have 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 50,000 on a Sunday, pre or post COVID, or millions on their stream, what about the church that has 50 and they're in an isolated town and they have no resources and no money and they're getting killed? But guess what? The law and politics of that small town is developing around the world's value system. And that law, once you win it there, is a lot easier to transfer it to the county. And once it's at the county level, it's a lot easier to transfer to the state level, and so on. So I hope you see where I'm going with this. If you want to have a dialogue on this, I'm not going to argue with anybody. If it's a dialogue about politics or whatever, I'm the wrong guy. Find somebody else. But if you want a dialogue on how we can do this better, you want to strategize on how we can actually structure and implement programs around this, reach out. I might get one email, I might get 100 emails, but I'm going to say, reach out on maybe brockshinen.com, because I want to be able to filter if there's craziness coming in. So look, I think the church is in a unique time in America. The church in America is in a unique time to be able to influence and in some ways dictate the future of how the church is treated in America. And we could either stand by and keep our programs of like, we need a president, we need a CEO, we need a chief surgeon, whatever. Sure, we do. But more importantly, or equally importantly, we need people, the masses, activated into local community that's influencing politics, that's influencing law enforcement, that's influencing education, influencing medicine, all of those things, those 7 mountains, those 7 spheres and beyond. We need people activated into there, which is without a script. I mean, that's real life. It doesn't have a script. So I hope this has helped you, challenged you in some ways. And if you're a pastor that's struggling with, well, how can I even do that? Like, what do I do if they fall off the rails? It's going to get messy. You're going to have to create some sort of system to bring those people back in and rehabilitate them and rehabilitate whatever damage. That's what we do as lawyers. If you go into a deposition and something goes off the rails, you, with your witness, you rehabilitate them. You find a way to bring them back into trust and validity, right? So that's what we have to do as churches. Sorry, kind of rambling here at the end, but I hope this helps you guys. And again, reach out if you have any questions, you want a dialogue, just go to brockshinen.com, BROCKSHINEN. Reach out through me there, and that's only so I can kind of filter, no other reason. Again, not selling anything. Don't expect anybody to sign up for anything. I'm just trying to help the church. And there you have it.